It is the notion that innovations are always good. But you don't need to think long before you realize that, well, that is not the case. Not all innovations are good. The theory of diffusion of innovation was born from a research on hybrid corn, which was highly effective in generating more food. It was a study made by Ryan and Gross in the 40s, who studied the spread of the use of hybrid corn amongst Iowa farmers. And this was perceived as very good, so therefore from the start, according to Rogers, the pro-innovation bias was built into this stream of research. And when Rogers, who had done similar studies, reflected upon his work in later years, he realized that a farmer who he had categorized as a laggard, because that farmer did not want to adopt the new farming technologies that he was studying, and the farmer didn't want to do that because he thought that it was bad for the environment. And when Rogers reflected upon that years later, he realized that, well, that farmer was actually very early in adopting eco farming or green farming. He thought about the environment so early on. So in terms of adopting the new technology, he was a laggard, but in terms of eco-friendly farming, he was an innovator. He was very early, or an early adopter at least. So it depends on what perspective you have, and it's very hard to know beforehand if an innovation will turn out to be very good or if it will be bad, because it's hard to see the consequences of an innovation beforehand. The pro-innovation bias is also affected by the research funding. Much diffusion research is funded by change agencies, and they have a pro-innovation bias since their very purpose is to promote innovation. And often firms fund research, and they also have a motivation to promote innovation. And governmental and private institutions as well have this viewpoint that innovation is good for society and we should promote it. How do we do that? Can you please investigate that, dear researcher? That is often the starting point. There are, however, cases where it's kind of clear that a technology is not good for a certain part of the population. One example is the diffusion of sex determination medical technology, especially ultrasound tests in rural areas in India and China. In the 80s, it was not considered good to get a girl in these rural areas. A boy was favored because the boy would carry on the family name and take care of the parents when they grow old. However, the girls had to be married off and then a dowry had to be paid. As one advertisement for the ultrasound test in India proclaimed, better to pay the cost of sex determination plus abortion now than to pay a dowry later. And this resulted in a lot of boys being born and fewer girls being born. And for society, that meant that a lot of boys had a problem finding someone to marry, given that they were heterosexual. So it was a technology that, from the perhaps narrow point of view for the families, was good because they would ensure having a boy. But for society at large, it wasn't that good, because now we had a situation with a lot more boys than girls, and it also perpetuated this notion that girls are not as good as boys. But it is hard to determine the consequence of innovation. Who knew that ultrasound technique would have this effect? Ultrasound technique is also very good because you can see diseases early on in the fetus, and you know more and can take precaution during a pregnancy. So it is hard to see the consequences, and it's hard to conduct research about consequences. One example of when this was done was made by an anthropologist who lived among the Sami people in the northern Finland for several years. And he could see what happened to the Sami people when the snowmobile was entered into their world. in the 60s, a Bombardier Ski-Doo from Canada was displayed in Rovaniemi, the capital city of Finnish Lapland. And this was purchased for reindeer herding in an area where the land was foresty and rocky. And when they used it for reindeer herding, they had to stand up so that they could spot reindeer at a great distance and steer around rocks, trees and other obstacles. But this was kind of dangerous for them, and they risked being thrown forward, and there was a risk of breakdowns of the snowmobiles caused by the rough terrain in Finnish Lapland. Prior to the introduction of snowmobiles, the Sami people herded semi-domesticated reindeer for their livelihood. Reindeer meat was the main food, and reindeer sleds were principal means of transportation. And they used the reindeer sleds to herd the reindeers as well. And surplus meat was sold for trading stores for cash to buy flour, sugar, tea and other staples. However, when they started using the snowmobile, who was faster than the reindeer, the noise and the smell of the machine drove the reindeer into a wild state, and the friendly relationship between the Sami people and their animals were disrupted by the high-speed machines. Frightened, running by the reindeer, they seized the number of reindeer calves born each year. So they did not get as many calves as they did before after starting using the snowmobile. And the snowmobile also cost money. So they had to slaughter more reindeers to be able to sell meat in order to afford gasoline and repairs for their snowmobiles. This disrupted their way of living close to the reindeer, because now they had to drop out of reindeer racing as a result of the snowmobile. Most could not find other work and became unemployed. On the other hand, one family, which was relatively early in purchasing a snowmobile, put up a large herd and by the start of the 70s owned 1/3 of all the reindeer in the community. So the snowmobile revolution pushed the Sami people in this area into a tailspin of cash dependency, debt and unemployment. And that consequence was not something that people who invented the Bombardier Ski-Doo in Canada, that they kind of envisioned that we're going to create this snowmobile and we're going to disrupt the way the Sami people in Finland are living their lives, and we're going to push them into cash dependency and debt and unemployment. But that became one of the consequences. And Sveiby and colleagues have studied the consequences of innovation, and it is hard to do so, but it is important to consider that there are consequences. You have some kind of change agent who promotes the innovation, and then when the innovation is adopted, there's some intended direct consequence. That is what the people who developed the innovation intended. Often this is something good. It might be bad from the start as well, but it's often something that they think will be good for people. But there are also some unintended direct consequences that the people developing the innovation did not think about, perhaps. And in the third line after that, these consequences might lead to other consequences, and these can be anticipated and desirable, they can be anticipated and undesirable. They can be unanticipated and desirable, and they can be unanticipated and undesirable. I am showing you this because I want to show you that there is a lot of uncertainty in innovation adoption and innovation diffusion. And there are consequences that you might not think about from the start. That was all for today. Here are some further reading that you can look into. And this link is the first second that I referred to earlier when I talked about first second. Thank you for listening.